Hey everyone, and welcome to another deep dive. Today we're talking about building a personal brand. Um, it feels like everyone's saying it's like the thing you need to focus on, right? So we're going to unpack that.
Yeah.
And to help us out, we're diving into Ryan Serhant's book, Brand It Like Serhant.
You know, it's funny. Everyone talks about personal branding, but it's one of those things that people kind of gloss over. They're like, yeah, personal brand, I get it.
Right, like just be yourself, right?
Right, exactly. But it's actually way more than that. There are actual, practical, concrete things you can do.
Yeah. And I think, thankfully, Serhant gets into those, which is what we're going to unpack today.
Yeah, absolutely.
He opens with, honestly, a hilarious anecdote. I think I chuckled out loud when I read this part. He talks about how he had just finished this massive renovation on his house, like really went all out.
Oh, no.
And yeah, all the fancy stuff, top to bottom. But then it flooded.
No.
And it turned out the problem wasn't the new stuff, it was the foundation. They neglected the foundation. And it's such a good analogy, right?
It's so true, right? Like, you can have this amazing, beautiful, shiny, whatever, like, resume or, portfolio,
Yeah.
website, all this, exterior stuff. But if you don't have that strong foundation, it can all crumble.
Yeah, and I think that's what Serhant's saying about personal branding, right? It's like,
Yeah.
that's the foundation. That's what makes everything else work, even if it looks good on the surface.
Right.
He spends a good amount of time kind of at the beginning talking about why this matters now. And, I think we all feel it, right?
Yeah.
Like the world of work has changed so much, even in the last few years.
Absolutely. I think especially, too, now that so many people are working remotely, I mean, really, your competition is global.
It's true. You're no longer just competing with the people in your office or even in your city. It's global. It's anyone.
So how do you stand out?
And that's his point, right? He's like,
Yeah.
you have to give people a reason to choose you.
Yeah.
And it's not enough to just be good at what you do anymore. Like, there are a lot of good people out there.
Right. There are a lot of talented people.
Right. So how do you differentiate yourself?
Mm-hmm.
And he really boils it down to this question of why you?
Why you? That's a great question, actually. It's something that, I think a lot of people can't answer very well.
Right. It's easy to talk about your skills or your experience, but what makes you uniquely you?
Yeah.
That's what a strong personal brand should answer.
Yeah.
It's like that elevator pitch, but for your whole career.
Yeah.
So someone says, okay, why should I hire you? Why should I work with you? Why should I listen to what you have to say?
Yeah.
Your personal brand should basically answer that question before they even ask it,
Oh.
ideally.
Totally. And I think that's where people get tripped up is like, how do you actually go about doing that?
Right. How do you figure that out?
Yes.
And how do you communicate that?
Yeah, exactly. And I think Serhant starts to give us a framework for this in his book.
He does. He breaks it down into three things.
Okay.
You need your viewpoint, your values, and your A&D.
Your Andy. Okay.
And we're going to unpack all of those, starting with viewpoint. So when we talk about viewpoint in terms of personal branding, what are we actually talking about?
So I think your viewpoint is kind of like your unique perspective, right? Especially in your field. Like, what are your core beliefs? What are your opinions, about your work?
Yeah.
Like, what are the things that really get you fired up, or maybe things that frustrate you, things that you wish you could change?
Right. So it's not just about what you do, it's about how you see the world, at least in the context of your work.
Exactly.
Okay, so you're identifying those things that make you tick, like what gets you excited. But then how does that translate into personal branding? What do you do with that?
So it's about kind of infusing those perspectives into your work and how you present yourself, right? Like, instead of just kind of being like a robot, you're like, oh, this is actually like my take on this.
Right.
Like, it makes you like a little bit more interesting, a little bit more memorable. You're not just like everybody else who does this thing.
Okay, so you're bringing like a little bit more of yourself to the table.
Yes, exactly.
But okay, that being said, it can't just be about having strong opinions, right?
Right.
Like that can get you into trouble sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely.
So this is where values come in, right?
Yes.
Talk to me about that because, we hear about values
Mm-hmm.
like in our personal lives, right? Like honesty, integrity, those kinds of things.
Right.
But how does that apply to a brand? Like it feels very personal, but brand feels very external. You know what I mean?
Yeah, totally. But I think they're actually incredibly crucial. It speaks to your character, right? Like how you operate, how you treat other people, how you approach your work. And I think that really builds trust and credibility. Like, if one of your core values is, let's say, transparency,
Okay.
that should be reflected in in how you communicate with your clients, with your audience, you know?
So it's not just like a bullet point on your website. It's like, this is how you actually show up in the world. This is how you...
Exactly. You're living it. You're breathing it.
Okay.
It's not just like a marketing ploy, you know?
Okay, so we've got our viewpoint. It's rooted in our values.
Right.
But then there's this whole and D thing.
Yes. The Andy.
And I feel like this is where it gets kind of interesting.
Yes.
Because, like, what is that?
So it's like that special something extra that you bring to the table.
Okay.
Right? It's like, it could be your sense of humor.
Right.
It could be, I don't know, like a really unconventional background, or even like a specific skill set that maybe isn't directly related to what you do.
So it's kind of like your signature style.
Yeah. Yes, exactly.
I'm thinking of Mark Manson.
Okay, yeah.
You know, the author.
Yep.
His whole thing is like, he's brutally honest.
Yes.
And he like swears a lot in his writing, which
works for him.
it works for him. It's not for everyone.
Right.
But it's very him.
Yes.
You know.
It's authentic to him.
Yes, and that's what I was going to say. It has to be authentic.
Yes.
It can't be something you're like trying to force.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Like if you're like naturally like a very bubbly, positive person,
Right.
trying to be like the dark and mysterious one, it's going to come off
I
as...
know, people are going to see through it.
They're going to see through it.
Yeah.
You know, you're not being genuine.
So authenticity is key.
Yes.
But like, how do you figure out what your aim D is? Because, you know, for some people, it's probably really obvious.
Right.
Like they're just naturally like, this is it.
Yeah.
But what if you're not sure?
Serhant actually, he talks about this. Like he has this thing called an interest audit, which I think is kind of a cool exercise.
Yep.
Where you really just like think about like, what are you naturally drawn to?
Okay.
Like what do you find yourself like talking about passionately? What did you love to do as a kid?
Oh, that's a good one.
Right, and just like see if you can start to connect the dots there.
Oh, I like that, yeah.
Because usually there's something there. It's just a matter of kind of uncovering it.
Yeah, and connecting it to your professional life.
Exactly.
Because it doesn't have to be something that's like directly related, but it should like inform how you show up, how you
Right.
do your work, that kind of thing.
It's like the secret sauce, right?
Yeah, exactly.
That you sprinkle on top.
He gives a really good example, actually, of his wife, Sydney,
Yes.
who's like a wellness expert.
Yeah, yeah.
And he talks about how she went through this process
Yeah.
of like really identifying, okay, what are my core values? And like she landed on things like empowering, educational, supportive.
Right, right. Which is perfect for a wellness expert.
Exactly.
Makes so much sense.
It's so her brand, it's great. But then he talks about this thing called the content matrix.
Yes. I love the content matrix. This is such a good tool.
Okay, break it down for us. What is it?
So basically it's like this grid, right?
Boy.
And you list your brand pillars.
All right.
So for Sydney, it would be like empowering, educational, supportive, and then you basically brainstorm content ideas that fit into each of those categories.
So it's like a way to make sure all of your content, whether it's on social media or your website, or even like if you're speaking somewhere,
Right.
it's all like laddering up to these core pillars.
Exactly. It keeps you consistent. You know, it helps you like really hone in on what your message is and who your audience is.
Yeah, so you're not just randomly posting whatever comes to mind.
Exactly. Have a strategy. And that goes back to, you know, what we were saying, consistency is key.
Yes, and he talks about that a lot in the book. Like, it's not about going viral once. It's about showing up day after day.
Yes.
Building that trust.
Building that like and trust factor.
Exactly, and I think that's what I love about personal branding. It's like, it's not about tricking people.
Right.
It's about like actually building those genuine connections.
Yeah, exactly.
Which, kind of a perfect segue.
Yes.
He tells this amazing story
Yes.
about how he met a billionaire client while buying ice cream.
Yes. I love that story.
He wasn't even working at the time.
Right.
He was just like getting ice cream.
Living his life.
And this guy recognized him, they got to talking, and it turned into this massive real estate deal.
I know. It's like, it's such a good example of how opportunity can come knocking when you least expect it.
It's like that saying, right? Luck is what happens when preparation meets opportunity.
Yes.
But I also think it speaks to the power of personal branding.
Yeah.
Because this guy already knew who Ryan Serhant was.
Yes.
He had a sense of like what he was about.
Right, his reputation preceded him, even in the ice cream aisle.
Exactly. And that's what I mean about it not being about tricking people.
Yes.
Because he's genuinely passionate about real estate.
right.
He loves connecting with people.
Yes.
So I'm sure, like, even if they hadn't talked about a specific deal,
Right.
he probably just stood out.
Yes, because he's being his authentic self.
Exactly. But, you know, this whole authenticity thing,
Yes.
it can be a double-edged sword.
Oh, right.
Because sometimes you could overshare.
Yes, oh, totally. And he actually talks about that in the book.
He does.
He has this funny anecdote about posting a photo of like a pimple on his face.
Yes, I remember.
Thinking it was relatable.
Thinking it was relatable.
And it did not go over well.
Yeah, it's like, okay, we get it, you're human.
Yeah, some things are better left unsaid.
Exactly.
Or, you know, not posted on social media for everyone to see.
So how do you find that balance then?
Right.
Between, like, being authentic,
Right.
but also, like, not oversharing, not being unprofessional?
Right, right. Where's that line?
Yeah, where's the line?
Yeah.
What does he say?
He talks about this idea of having like an on the table and an off the table list
Okay.
for content, right? Like, what are the things that are like fair game that you know are relevant to your brand, that are relevant to, you know, what you're trying to do, what your audience is interested in,
Yeah.
and then like what are the things that are just like firmly off the table?
So it's about being intentional.
Yes, yes.
Even if it feels authentic in the moment.
Right.
It's like, does this fit into my larger message?
Exactly. Exactly. Just because something's true
Right.
doesn't mean you have to share it.
Right, exactly. Doesn't mean it's like on brand.
Yes.
You know?
Exactly.
It's funny because, you know, he talks about this idea of consistency,
Yes, so important.
which we've touched on a little bit.
Yeah.
But he really hammers it home throughout this book.
It's huge. It's so important.
And I think the analogy he uses is really helpful.
Okay.
He's like, think of your brand like a garden.
Okay, I like that.
You wouldn't just like throw any seed in there and hope it grows.
Right, right.
You know, like you have to be thoughtful about what you're planting.
Yeah, what's going to thrive in your climate?
Exactly. And you have to nurture it consistently.
Yes. Tend to your garden, people.
Yes. And then weed out the things that don't belong. Right.
Yes. Get rid of those weeds.
Because they're just going to like suck the life out of everything else.
Exactly. They're taking up space.
Exactly.
Where your beautiful flowers should be blooming.
I love that analogy because it makes me think of all the things that you should be doing for your personal brand.
Right, like post on every platform every day.
Yes, or like go live every day and it's like, oh my God.
Yeah, it's overwhelming.
It's so overwhelming. And it can feel very inauthentic too because it's like...
Right, you're just chasing some algorithm.
Exactly. So I love that he brings it back to like quality over quantity.
Yes.
And intentionality over like just adding to the noise.
Absolutely. Like, be thoughtful about what you put out there.
Yeah, because everything you put out there is like a little seed.
It is. It's like a little representation of you going out into the world.
Exactly.
Whether you like it or not.
Whether you like it or not.
It's out there.
And it ties back to that foundation, right?
It does.
It's like you want to build something strong.
Strong and sturdy.
That can withstand the storms.
Yes. The internet is a fickle place.
It is.
You know, one minute you're up, the next minute, you know, who knows what's going to happen.
Right. Exactly.
So having that strong foundation can really help you, you know, weather those storms.
Yeah, that's so true.
Yeah.
And, you know, speaking of things that can be challenging, he actually talks about perfectionism.
Yes.
Which I think is really interesting.
It's so common.
It is so common.
Especially in the online world, right?
Yes. And he talks about how his dad, who was like a blue-collar worker his whole life,
Yeah.
instilled in him this value of hard work,
Yes.
but also good enough.
Good enough. Yes.
Like sometimes done is better than perfect.
Yes. 100%.
And I think that's such an important message, especially for people who are just starting out.
Right, because you're never going to get it perfect the first time.
Never, ever, ever.
And you're going to paralyze yourself if you try.
Exactly. You're just never going to put anything out there.
Just get it out there.
Yeah. It's better to have something out there that's like 80% of the way there.
Yes. And then you can always go back and tweak it.
Exactly. And you learn so much more by actually putting it out in the world.
100%. So you get feedback, you get to see what resonates,
Yeah.
what doesn't. It's all part of the process.
I love that. I love that.
Yeah, embrace the journey.
Embrace the journey. So I think if we had to like boil down like the biggest takeaway from this book,
Yeah.
because he talks about a lot, which is great.
He does. He goes really deep
You know.
on a lot of different things.
But I think like if we were to say like if you're just starting out, like what's the one thing to really focus on?
What would you say?
What would you say?
I think the thing that really stuck with me is his question. If your brand was a person, who would they be?
Ooh, I like that.
Right. Like if you could embody your brand, like as a human, who would it be?
It makes you think about it as more than like a logo or a tagline.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. It's like, what are the values? What's the perspective? What's the personality?
Yes.
And
how does that show up
Yes.
in everything that you do?
Everything, every interaction, every piece of content,
That's so good.
Yeah.
I love that. I think that's a really good place to end this conversation.
I think so too.
Because it gives you something to like really chew on, you know?
Yeah, something to think about.
It's not just like a to-do list.
Yeah,
It's like a bigger picture thing.
Exactly. Yeah. Like, who do you want to be in the world? And how can your brand help you do that?
Oh, that's good. I love that.
Yeah.
Well, on that note,
Yes.
thank you all for joining us on another deep dive.
Yes. Thank you.
We'll see you next time.
Bye, everyone.